He dragged the girl by her hair right in the middle of the street, unaware that her mother was Ronda Rousey. What happened next shocked everyone. Subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching from. The late summer sun cast a golden haze over the Santa Monica Pier, where a sea breeze mingled with the sugary aroma of funnel cakes and cotton candy. Tourists drifted lazily among the boardwalk vendors, and the ocean hummed steadily in the background like a living, breathing rhythm beneath the surface of the day. Children squealed on the roller coaster overhead, and the occasional bark of a street performer's microphone added texture to the evening's chaos. 12-year-old Aurelia Rousey moved through the scene with the restless excitement of a girl just old enough to enjoy a bit of independence. She wore a black hoodie with faded lettering, her sandy blonde hair pulled into a messy ponytail. Her face, freckled and lightly sunburned from the afternoon, was locked in a beaming smile as she walked beside her best friend, Caitlin. The two girls clutched cones of soft-serve ice cream in their hands, Aurelia's with chocolate and rainbow sprinkles, Caitlin's with vanilla and caramel drizzle. "Okay, but you have to admit," Caitlin was saying through giggles, "the dolphin looked like it was waving at you." "It wasn't waving, it was trying to eat the fish I dropped," Aurelia shot back, laughing as she wiped a dab of ice cream from her lip. "That thing was huge, like prehistoric huge." They turned the corner near a busking saxophonist playing a slow, soulful rendition of "Somewhere Over the Rainbow." Aurelia tossed a crumpled dollar into his open case, and the man nodded with a faint smile. The energy in the air felt gentle and celebratory. Everything about the evening screamed normalcy, a perfect kind of ordinary. The pier was packed, but not uncomfortably so. Families posed for photos in front of the Ferris wheel, and teenagers clustered near the arcade with oversized plush toys won from rigged games. Aurelia's dad was supposed to pick them up in an hour, and until then the girls had freedom, at least within the invisible perimeter of what Ronda Rousey considered safe. Aurelia's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, glanced at the message from her mom. "Headed to the gym. Text when you're done. Be safe, baby." Aurelia grinned. Her mother was always watching, even when she wasn't physically there. It was annoying sometimes, but tonight she felt comforted by it. As they reached the far end of the pier, Aurelia's attention was caught by a new ice cream cart parked near the lifeguard station. The vendor was a cheerful older woman who handed out cones with a flourish like she was serving royal desserts. Aurelia decided she needed a second one, and Caitlin didn't argue. The evening was too beautiful for calorie counting. "2 chocolate swirls, please," Aurelia said, reaching for her wallet. She had just turned around, freshly filled cones in hand, when it happened. A shoulder brushed hers, firm, deliberate. Her foot shifted reflexively, and in that fractional second, her ice cream lurched sideways. A dollop of it landed squarely on the tan sleeve of a nearby man's uniform. "Oh no," Aurelia murmured. "I'm so sorry." The man turned. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and built like someone who had never skipped a bench press in his life. His face was ruddy with sun, his jaw square, his mouth already tightening into a sneer. A gold star glinted from the left side of his chest. Sheriff Jonathan Cross, Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. The badge was slightly dulled, his khaki uniform stretched taut across his thick torso. He smelled faintly of sweat and cologne. "You've got to be kidding me," he growled. Aurelia blinked, shrinking back. "It was an accident. I didn't see—" "Watch where you're going," he snapped, brushing the stain with the back of his hand, then examining it as though she'd thrown acid at him. I said, I'm sorry, she repeated, her voice shaking now. Yeah, I heard you, he muttered. Funny how kids like you always come up with the same excuses. Too busy playing with your phones to have any damn respect. Caitlin stepped back instinctively. The people nearby glanced over, some slowing, some pretending not to see. Aurelia stood frozen, the remaining ice cream trembling slightly in her hand. Cross loomed closer. What? Nothing else to say? Just going to ruin my uniform and walk away like it's no big deal? It was just ice cream, Aurelia managed, barely above a whisper. That was the wrong thing to say. His hand snapped forward, not to strike, not yet, but to snatch the cone from her grip and throw it to the ground. The splatter of it on the pavement drew gasps. Aurelia recoiled, eyes wide, her breath caught in her chest. Now you're littering, he said coldly. That's not fair, she started. He stepped closer. Don't talk back to me. People were watching now. Phones began to rise, subtle but visible. Cross didn't seem to care. His eyes burned with the smug certainty of someone who knew power was on his side. Aurelia turned to walk away, her cheeks burning with embarrassment and confusion. She wanted to find Caitlin and run. But before she could take more than 2 steps, his hand closed around her upper arm, fingers digging into her sleeve. Where do you think you're going? He barked. You think you can disrespect an officer of the law and just stroll off? I didn't disrespect, she tried, panic sharpening her words. Back talk now? His voice rose. You think your little apology erases this? You think you're above consequence? He yanked her roughly toward him, and then he did the unthinkable. With one hand still gripping her arm, the other reached up, grabbed a fistful of her ponytail, and pulled. The pain was instant and excruciating. Aurelia shrieked, her knees nearly buckling as she tried to twist free. Tears sprang to her eyes. He pulled again. Say you're sorry like you mean it, he hissed into her ear. The crowd erupted, gasps, shouts, people surging forward. Someone screamed, Get your hands off her! Another shouted, That's a child! But Cross stood unmoved, using his badge like armor, his authority like a weapon. Somewhere behind them, footsteps pounded the boardwalk. They weren't loud, they weren't fast, but they carried weight. Ronda Rousey didn't burst onto the scene. She didn't scream her daughter's name. She walked with the precision of someone who had been in more fights than most people had seen on television. She saw the man holding her child. She saw the handful of hair. She saw the trembling shoulders and the ice cream on the pavement. She didn't blink. Aurelia didn't even realize her mother was there until she heard the voice behind her, calm, low, and colder than the ocean breeze. What exactly do you think you're doing to my daughter? The entire crowd froze. Sheriff Cross released Aurelia as if burned. She stumbled backward and fell to her knees, clutching her scalp. He turned, annoyed, ready to bark a retort, but then he saw her. Ronda's face was unreadable. No anger, no fury, just ice. Her hands were relaxed at her sides, but her posture was unmistakable. Controlled. Ready. Cross squinted, uncertain. Recognition flickered in his expression. Yes, she said. And that was all it took for the tide to turn. Phones came up faster now. People began shouting her name. It's Ronda Rousey. Oh my God, she's here? That's her daughter? That was her kid? Cross swallowed, his mouth suddenly dry. His authority drained out of him like a punctured tire. Ronda moved toward her daughter, bent low. You okay, baby? Aurelia nodded through tears. He pulled my hair. I know, I saw. She stood again and faced him. Her eyes never left his. You made a mistake. And just like that, the story had begun. Not the one Cross thought he was writing, but the one the world was about to read. The crowd had become an organism of its own, pulsing and shifting with every breath, every whisper, every gasp. People stood shoulder to shoulder, drawn in by the weight of something raw and real unfolding before them. Some held their phones high, recording every movement, every nuance. Others simply watched, paralyzed by disbelief and outrage. But no one moved to intervene now, not since Ronda Rousey had stepped onto the scene like a force of nature, wrapped in silence. Sheriff Jonathan Cross, for all his years in uniform, found himself unable to fully process the moment. He had faced down suspects with guns, combative drunks in dark alleys, and aggressive protesters on the city steps, but never had he come face to face with someone who exuded control and presence the way this woman did. It wasn't just her reputation, though that alone was formidable. It was the way she stood, the absolute stillness of her frame, the way her voice had cut through the air like a scalpel. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to threaten. Every fiber of her being said, "You crossed a line." Aurelia was still on her knees, her small frame shaking, her hand clutching her head where his fingers had yanked her hair. Caitlin had returned and was now crouched beside her, wide-eyed and terrified. Ronda didn't reach for Cross. She didn't move toward him with fists clenched. She only looked at him with a gaze that made his badge feel suddenly like a tin toy. "I didn't know she was your kid," he said, his voice brittle, barely audible. "That's the problem," Ronda replied. "You shouldn't have to know." Cross shifted, his hand twitching by his side, brushing against the leather of his duty belt. He wasn't reaching for his weapon, not exactly, but there was hesitation, a flicker of instinct to fall back on dominance, on muscle memory. He'd been trained to command, to take control, but this situation wasn't his anymore, and he knew it. It had already slipped from his hands the moment he laid them on that girl. "You assaulted a child in broad daylight," someone in the crowd shouted. "What's wrong with you?" "He pulled her hair," another voice rang out. "You need to lose your badge." Cross turned slightly, his face flushing. "She disrespected me," he said, louder now, trying to reclaim authority. "She got ice cream on my uniform." She mouthed off. "She's 12, Ronda barked, her voice finally rising. "You're a grown man with a gun and a badge, and you dragged a child by the hair because she mouthed off? Are you even hearing yourself?" The words landed like stones. The crowd murmured, anger rising like a tide. Aurelia had risen now, leaning into her mother's side. Her eyes were swollen with tears, her cheeks stained and blotchy, but she stood. Not quite tall, not quite strong, but standing nonetheless. "I tried to say sorry," she whispered. "I really did." Ronda wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pressing a kiss into her temple. "I know, baby. I saw." The noise of the crowd swelled again, and then from behind them the shrill wail of a siren broke through the chaos. A black and white cruiser turned onto the pier's access road, lights flashing but no urgency in its speed. It pulled up to the edge of the boardwalk where several officers quickly exited. They moved with practiced steps, eyes scanning the crowd, hands resting near their hips. But their faces changed when they saw who stood at the center of the storm. One of them, a younger officer with close-cropped hair and cautious eyes, recognized Ronda immediately. "Ma'am," he said, approaching carefully, "can you tell us what happened?" "She can't," someone shouted from the side. "But we can. We saw the whole damn thing." "There's video," another person added. "Multiple videos. He assaulted that girl." The officer turned toward Cross. "Sheriff Cross, is that true?" Cross squared his shoulders. I was attempting to de-escalate a situation involving a disrespectful minor who... She got ice cream on his sleeve. Ronda cut in, her voice steely. And for that, he dragged her by the hair and tried to haul her to his car. The younger officer glanced between the two, his jaw tightening. "Sheriff, I'm going to ask you to step aside while we sort this out." "I'm not stepping aside on my own pier," Cross growled. "This is my jurisdiction." "Not anymore," said another voice behind him. An older officer, clearly of higher rank, had arrived. His name tag read Sergeant Moreno. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were hard. Cross turned slowly. "Sergeant." "Give us a minute," Moreno said. Cross hesitated, then nodded stiffly and stepped back. The sergeant motioned to the officers to lower the tension. Ronda leaned into Aurelia, whispering something into her ear. The girl nodded and stepped behind her mother, flanked now by Caitlin and a concerned couple who had come forward to offer comfort. Moreno stepped closer to Ronda. "Miss Rousey, I'm Sergeant Moreno. First, I want to make sure your daughter's okay." "She's not," Ronda said flatly. "She will be, but right now she's shaken. She was manhandled by a man twice her size, in public, for absolutely nothing." Moreno nodded. "I've already called Internal Affairs. There'll be a full investigation." "No," Ronda said. "This isn't going to be buried in paperwork. That man assaulted my daughter in front of dozens of witnesses, and you're going to do something about it now." The sergeant's expression didn't change, but his voice softened. "You have my word this won't be brushed aside, but I'm asking you, please, let us handle this by the book." Ronda looked over her shoulder at Aurelia. The girl was holding tightly to Caitlin's hand, her other hand still pressed to her scalp where her hair had been yanked. She looked small and quiet and impossibly young. "Fine," Ronda said finally, "but I'll be watching every step." "And so will we," someone in the crowd shouted. "We've got the footage. We'll post it everywhere." Moreno glanced around. A sea of faces, angry, alert, armed with cameras, was already part of the story. The damage to the department's image had been done before he even arrived. Cross stood nearby, arms crossed, jaw clenched. He looked not like a lawman anymore, but like a child who had been caught breaking a rule and couldn't quite comprehend the consequences. When a patrol car pulled up to take Cross back to the station for immediate review, the murmur in the crowd turned into applause. As the sheriff was led away, someone yelled, "Hope you're proud of yourself." Another called, "Your badge won't protect you now." Aurelia buried her face in her mother's side as the man disappeared. As the officers dispersed the crowd and the light began to fade over the water, Ronda and Aurelia sat on a bench nearby. Ronda had refused medical attention for now. Her only concern was calming her daughter. "I didn't even do anything," Aurelia whispered at last. "I was just holding ice cream." "I know," Ronda said, "and that's why it's not your fault. Not any of it. I didn't think someone like that could just grab me like that." Ronda closed her eyes. "I know, sweetheart, but they do, and too often they get away with it." A long silence followed. "Are they going to punish him?" Aurelia asked quietly. "They're going to try," Ronda replied, "but that's not always how it works, which is why people like me have to make sure they can't just walk away." Aurelia looked up. "You weren't scared of him at all." Ronda smiled faintly. "I wasn't thinking about being scared. I was thinking about you." That night, after police reports were taken and the crowd had thinned, Ronda drove them home. The car was silent for most of the ride. Aurelia held a small ice pack against her head. Caitlin had been dropped off already. and Rhonda's phone buzzed constantly from messages, notifications, and news alerts. Videos were already circulating. Headlines were brewing, but Rhonda didn't look at any of it. She kept her eyes on the road, and her hand occasionally reached over to squeeze her daughter's. At a red light, Aurelia said, "You didn't hit him." Rhonda's brow furrowed. "No? Even though he hurt me?" "I know. Why not?" Rhonda sighed, because sometimes showing restraint hurts them more than a punch ever could. Aurelia nodded slowly. When they got home, Rhonda tucked her in, laid beside her for a long time, and didn't speak. But outside their quiet home, the world was already beginning to shake. Tomorrow, the headlines would scream, and the nation would know that someone's child had been grabbed, humiliated, and nearly dragged away. But her mother showed up, and everything changed. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, but the firestorm it left behind in Santa Monica burned hotter than anyone could have expected. By the time Rhonda and Aurelia arrived home that night, the air was thick with silence, but their phones were anything but quiet. Notifications chimed in bursts: text messages, voicemails, news alerts, missed calls. Rhonda had silenced her phone on the drive, not because she didn't care, but because she needed space to think. The image of her daughter, knees scraped and face streaked with tears, was lodged behind her eyes like a splinter that wouldn't loosen. Aurelia sat on the couch, holding a microwave towel wrapped in a plastic bag of ice against her scalp. The physical pain had dulled, but the confusion and humiliation lingered in every movement. She looked older now than she had that morning, as if a layer of childhood had been peeled off in public under fluorescent lights and camera lenses. Rhonda stood in the kitchen, watching tea steep in silence. She'd always hated green tea, but tonight it was something warm and grounding. The TV flickered quietly in the background, one of the local news stations looping through footage from earlier. The video had been edited by someone fast and skilled. It showed Aurelia's frightened face, Cross's rough hands, and Rhonda's silent, frozen presence just before she stepped in. Aurelia turned her face towards the screen, but didn't speak. Rhonda crossed the room and sat beside her, placing the warm cup in the girl's hands. "Thanks," Aurelia mumbled. "You want me to turn it off?" Rhonda asked. "No, I want to hear what they're saying." For a moment, they just sat there. Then the screen cut to a studio shot. A panel of pundits, 2 men and 1 woman, were already discussing the incident on the pier. The phrases came out fast, layered in rhetoric: excessive force, abuse of authority, minor injured, bystander intervention, civilian response. Then one of them said the name: Ronda Rousey. Ronda tensed, her hand closed around her knee. Confirmed by sources close to the family, the girl seen in the video being manhandled by L.A. County Sheriff Jonathan Cross is the daughter of former UFC champion and actress Ronda Rousey, who can also be seen confronting the officer on site, the anchor continued. Cross, who has served in the sheriff's department for over 15 years, has a history of citizen complaints, some of which are now resurfacing online. Rhonda exhaled slowly. She wasn't surprised. She'd seen the pattern before: bad men given too many chances until the wrong one was caught on video. But the difference now was personal. This wasn't just another case, this was her child. "What does that mean?" Aurelia asked softly. "Citizen complaints. It means this wasn't the first time he used his badge like a weapon," Rhonda said. "Just the first time the whole world saw it." The next morning, the world hadn't just seen it, it was screaming about it. The hashtags were trending before sunrise. #Justice for Aurelia, #Ronda Rousey, #Cross the Line, #Protect Our Kids. News stations across the country picked it up, then international outlets followed. Videos of the altercation spread across every platform imaginable, some from multiple angles. Someone had captured the moment Cross threw Aurelia's ice cream to the ground, another had caught the instant he grabbed her hair. But the footage that spread fastest was the still frame of Ronda stepping between her daughter and the sheriff, not even touching him, just looking. That one image became symbolic. It was on Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, even Pinterest boards. The caption varied, but the message didn't. This is what protection looks like. At noon, a knock came at the front door. Ronda opened it slowly to reveal a local reporter with a camera crew parked across the street. "Miss Rousey, I know this is a difficult time, but would you be willing to make a brief statement?" Ronda closed the door without a word. 2 minutes later, her agent called, then her publicist, then 3 separate talk shows. She ignored them all. It wasn't until late afternoon that she responded, to one person only, a local women's shelter coordinator who had messaged her privately, thanking her for standing up for her daughter. Ronda sent a simple reply, "Thank you. We don't all get someone who shows up. That should change." She didn't want to go public, not yet, but the fire wouldn't wait. By the time she logged onto Instagram, her inbox was flooded with stories. People who had witnessed similar abuse, kids who had felt powerless, mothers who had no platform. Some messages were messy, some rage-filled, others barely a sentence. But they all shared one thing. They saw themselves in Aurelia. That night, Ronda sat on the porch after Aurelia had gone to bed, her laptop open, the screen glowing in the dark. She typed without overthinking. "I didn't want to be in the news this week. I didn't want my daughter to cry on the sidewalk while strangers recorded her pain. I didn't want a grown man to grab her by the hair and make her feel small because she accidentally dropped some ice cream on his sleeve. But I also didn't want to stay quiet." She hit post. Within 30 minutes, the post had over 200,000 likes. The comments poured in. Public figures chimed in. Teachers, athletes, mothers, veterans, even officers. The following morning, a formal statement was issued by the LA County Sheriff's Department. Sheriff Cross was being placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The language was cold and clinical, wrapped in legal qualifiers, but it wasn't enough to quell the tide. Aurelia stayed home from school. Ronda kept her close. They baked muffins that neither of them felt like eating. They played a board game halfway through before losing interest. And when the doorbell rang again, this time with someone offering flowers, Ronda almost smiled. "I don't get it," Aurelia said, sitting on the floor surrounded by crumpled wrapping paper from supportive packages. "Why do all these people care now?" "Because they saw you," Ronda replied. "And they saw him. And they saw what happens when someone strong enough says no." "But they're not mad at you? For not, I don't know, fighting him?" Ronda leaned forward. "If I had hit him, this story wouldn't be about you. It'd be about me. And he'd still be the one playing the victim." Aurelia stared at her. "That's not fair." "No," Ronda agreed. "But now he has to face what he did, and that's a fight I will win." By the end of the week, everything had shifted. Aurelia's school invited Ronda to speak at a safety and leadership assembly. At first, she refused. She didn't want to turn trauma into performance. But Aurelia asked her to go, said maybe it would help the other kids feel less alone. So she agreed. The school gymnasium was packed. Parents, teachers, students, even a few officers from the local precinct. When Rhonda stepped onto the stage wearing a plain black sweater and jeans, the room went silent. She didn't have notes. She didn't need them. "I'm not here as a celebrity," she began. "I'm here as a mom who had to watch her child get hurt while people just stood around, and then had to decide how to respond." She told them everything, not with dramatics, not with flair, just plainly, and with the steady rhythm of someone who had lived it. "I didn't hit him," she said at one point, "because I wasn't thinking about punishment. I was thinking about protection. I was thinking about what would stay with my daughter longer, my fist or my presence." The room was quiet. Some students wept openly. A few teachers did too. Then Aurelia stepped forward. She wore a hoodie pulled low over her eyes, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. "I didn't want to be the part of anything big," she said. "I just wanted some ice cream. And because of how I looked and who I was, someone thought I didn't matter." Her lip trembled. "But my mom showed up, and maybe someone else will now too." There was no applause at first, just silence. Then a single clap, then another, and soon the room was on its feet. Outside the gym, Sheriff Cross sat in a car alone, watching the building. He had seen the videos 100 times now. Each time, they hit harder. Each time, he heard himself louder. The sneer, the bark, the hand in her hair. He'd received notice of a mandatory psychological review. The department wasn't shielding him anymore. Public pressure had made sure of that. His phone buzzed again. "Your appointment is confirmed. Dr. Helen Yamada. Tomorrow, 3 p.m. He didn't delete the message. He didn't throw the phone. He just sat there. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like the man in the badge. Back in the Rousey home, the noise had settled. The cameras had pulled back. The hashtags still trended, but quieter now. Rhonda and Aurelia sat on the couch, surrounded by bags of untouched fan mail. "Do you think it made a difference?" Aurelia asked. Rhonda wrapped an arm around her. "I think it started something. And what happens next? That's not just up to us anymore." The TV flickered. A rerun of a nature show played softly. Wolves protecting their pups, standing still in the snow. Rhonda smiled. Sometimes the strongest thing you could do wasn't strike. It was stand. The auditorium smelled faintly of waxed wood and dust, the kind of scent that clung to old gyms and school assemblies. Long before the students filed in, the maintenance staff had unfolded the rows of metal chairs and tested the microphone twice. The banner strung above the stage read, "Student Safety and Leadership Week," in cheerful block letters, but no one in the room mistook this gathering for routine. Not after what had happened. Not after the video. Not after the speeches, the headlines, and the growing public reckoning. Rhonda stood in the wings of the stage, arms crossed over her chest, watching the rows fill. She hadn't worn makeup. She hadn't brought a speech. Her jeans were clean but faded, her boots scuffed from use, and her black shirt clung to her shoulders like armor. In front of the stage, a large projector screen had been rolled down, showing a still image from one of the videos. Her, standing between her daughter and Sheriff Cross. It had become symbolic, without her meaning it to. She didn't like that kind of attention. She preferred the cage of the octagon or the structure of a film set. But today was something else. Today, her silence would say more than any championship belt ever could. Aurelia was seated near the front with her homeroom class, her hood pulled low as if she hoped no one would recognize her. That was impossible now. The girl who once walked these hallways as just another quiet seventh grader had become a symbol of something too big to name. She didn't yet understand the weight of that, but she felt it. In the stares, in the awkward, well-meaning smiles, in the way her classmates now hesitated before speaking to her. Principal Emerson approached Rhonda backstage, clipboard in hand, smile rehearsed and nervous. "Thank you again for agreeing to this. I know it's not easy." Rhonda nodded but said nothing. She wasn't here for thank yous. The principal gestured to the podium. "We'll begin with a short introduction from me. Then the district's liaison officer will say a few words, and then you'll have the floor. After that, if your daughter is comfortable, she can say something too. But of course, there's no pressure." Rhonda's eyes flicked to the chairs where Aurelia sat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "She'll speak," she said. At precisely 10 o'clock, the principal took the stage and welcomed everyone. The room, packed wall-to-wall with students, parents, staff, and even some uniformed officers, fell into a hush. The lights dimmed slightly, spotlighting the podium. After a brief, generic speech about safety, community, and the importance of courage in the face of adversity, the district liaison took his place, offering a few stiff words about school partnerships with law enforcement and the ongoing review of procedures. It was all safe, sanitized, and forgettable. Then Rhonda stepped onto the stage. The room changed. She didn't take the podium. She didn't need a microphone. She stood center stage and looked at them, the rows of young faces, teachers, officers, even a few reporters in the back with press badges clipped to their collars. "I didn't come here today to talk about myself," she began, her voice clear and low. "You already know who I am. Some of you have seen me fight. Some of you know me from movies. None of that matters right now." The auditorium was silent. "I'm not here as a fighter," she said. "I'm here as a mom." She paused, letting the words settle. "Last week, my daughter was walking through a public space, doing something ordinary. She was 12, she was holding an ice cream cone, and she bumped into a man in uniform. It was an accident. That man didn't see a child. He saw a target. He used his badge to assert power over her. He grabbed her, he hurt her, and he humiliated her, and she would have been dragged away alone if no one had stopped him." A student in the second row wiped tears from her cheek. Rhonda saw, but she didn't change her tone. "You've seen the video. You know what happened next. I stepped in, but I didn't step in as someone famous. I stepped in because no child deserves to be treated that way. I stepped in because if it wasn't my kid, it could have been yours. And maybe no one would have come." She let the silence stretch again. "There are people who say I should have hit him, that I should have used my fists, that I could have knocked him out cold. And I could have. But I didn't, because this wasn't a fight about strength. It was about restraint, about showing that power doesn't have to look like domination. It can look like presence, like protection, like someone standing still and saying, 'No more.'" Students shifted in their seats. The gym, filled with over 100 bodies, felt like it was holding its breath. "Every one of you has a voice," Rhonda continued. "Some of you are still learning how to use it. Some of you have already been told to stay quiet. I'm here to tell you, don't. Speak, stand. Whether it's for yourself or for someone next to you, don't wait for someone else to show up. Be the one." She turned, nodded once toward the crowd, then stepped aside. There was no applause at first, just stillness. Then Aurelia rose. Her steps to the stage were small, measured, hesitant, but she made it. Rhonda stepped down to the floor and watched from the side. Aurelia approached the podium. Her voice, when it came, was soft but steady. "I didn't want to be famous. I didn't want to be in videos or on the news. I just wanted to eat my ice cream." There were a few scattered chuckles, quiet, respectful. "I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't yell. I didn't fight. I tried to say sorry, but he didn't care. He didn't see a kid. He saw someone he thought he could scare." Her throat tightened, but she didn't cry. "I was really scared," she said, "and if my mom hadn't been there, I don't know what would have happened. But not everyone has someone who shows up, so if I can say anything, I guess it's this. Don't assume someone else will help. Be the one who helps. Be the one who stays." Silence. Then a clap. Then another. Then the room erupted into applause, not polite or restrained, but thunderous. Students stood, teachers rose with them, even some of the officers clapped. Backstage, Ronda wiped her eye and exhaled. Her daughter hadn't just survived. She had spoken. After the assembly, the crowd moved slowly. Students approached Aurelia, offering hugs or shy words. A teacher asked for a copy of her speech. One boy said, "I saw what happened. You're brave." Aurelia smiled for the first time in days. Outside, a group of mothers waited by the curb. One of them stepped forward as Ronda approached. "You didn't just speak for your daughter," the woman said. "You spoke for mine, too." Ronda nodded. "Thank you." The woman hesitated. "If there's anything we can do, petitions, community pressure, media, just say the word." "I think the word's already out," Ronda replied. Later that evening, Aurelia was in her room rereading the handwritten notes passed to her after the assembly. Ronda sat on the porch with her laptop again, this time not posting, just watching. The mayor's office had issued a statement that afternoon. A city-wide review of law enforcement protocols had been ordered. Cross remained under investigation, his legal counsel declining all interviews. But more than that, parents were speaking, teachers, coaches, clergy. The spark had become something else now. It wasn't just a moment. It was a conversation. And somewhere across town, Jonathan Cross watched the footage of the assembly on his cracked phone screen. He had paused the moment Aurelia stepped up to speak. Replayed it. He didn't recognize the man he had been that day, but the world did. His badge sat on the coffee table beside him. He hadn't worn it since the night of the incident. His uniform hung in the closet, the ice cream stain still faintly visible despite multiple attempts to scrub it away. His phone buzzed. Reminder. Therapy appointment with Dr. Yamada. Tomorrow, 3 p.m. He stared at the screen for a long time, then clicked confirm. At the Rousey home, Aurelia emerged from her room just as Ronda was turning off the porch light. She held out a paper slip. "They want me to help lead the student council's new safety committee," she said. Ronda took the slip, read it, and smiled. "Guess you're not just a regular 7th grader anymore. I don't want to be famous." "You're not," Ronda said. "You're a voice." The lights went out. The night settled. But nothing was the same anymore. And that was exactly how it should be. The sunlight filtered gently through the tall palms lining Ocean Avenue, brushing against storefronts and parked cars like the slow hand of something healing. The city buzzed as always, but beneath the surface of its usual rhythm, something had shifted. There were no sirens today, no shouting, no headlines breaking the peace in that moment. Just the sound of sandals against the sidewalk, strollers rolling past cafes, and laughter from nearby buskers. It could have been any other afternoon in Santa Monica, if not for what it symbolized now. Aurelia Rousey walked beside her mother, holding her hand without self-consciousness. They were dressed simply. No makeup, no designer brands, no press trailing behind them, just two people retracing the path that, not so long ago, had become a national stage. Rhonda carried a canvas bag with a few water bottles and sunscreen, and Aurelia carried nothing but the memory. They turned the corner near the ice cream vendor. The same woman stood behind the cart, smiling the same smile, but this time her eyes widened when she saw them. Without a word, she reached for 2 cones and handed them over. "On the house," she said gently. Aurelia took the cone with a small, grateful smile. "Thank you." The woman nodded. "You came back." "Of course," Rhonda answered, her voice quiet. They walked together toward the bench at the edge of the pier, the same one Aurelia had collapsed near that day. It looked different now, maybe smaller, less threatening, but the memory remained etched into the space around it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just sat. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, unmoved by politics, by pain, by progress. It simply breathed. Rhonda glanced at her daughter, watching her lick the melting chocolate around the edges of her cone. "Feels different?" "A little," Aurelia said. "It's still kind of weird." "Yeah," Rhonda murmured. "Weird's about right." There was a long pause. "People still stare at me," Aurelia said. "Even at school. Not in a mean way. Just like they don't know what to say." "They probably don't." Aurelia kicked her legs lightly under the bench. "Do you think they'll ever stop?" Rhonda looked out at the sea. "I think maybe it's not about them stopping. It's about you not needing them to." The girl was quiet for a while. Then, suddenly, she turned. "You know, sometimes I still get mad. Not at you, just at everything. Like, why did it have to happen? Why me?" Rhonda nodded, not interrupting. "I wasn't trying to be brave," Aurelia went on. "I just wanted a normal day. And now everyone keeps calling me courageous and strong and saying I gave them hope. But I didn't mean to." "You don't have to mean to," Rhonda said. "You just have to live through it." "But what if I didn't want to be the example?" "You didn't choose what happened," Rhonda replied gently, "but you get to choose what comes next." They sat there as the wind picked up. The sky above had shifted into a soft mosaic of orange and lavender. Children laughed somewhere behind them, and a man tuned his guitar in preparation for his evening performance on the boardwalk. Then a voice called out hesitantly, "Miss Rousey?" Rhonda turned. A woman, perhaps in her early 40s, approached with a teenage girl beside her. The girl was thin, with curly hair pulled into a bun and oversized glasses that slid down her nose. She held a small notebook against her chest like a shield. "I'm sorry," the woman said quickly. "We didn't want to intrude. We just saw you from across the pier." Rhonda smiled with measured warmth. "It's all right. My daughter wanted to meet you, if that's okay." The girl stepped forward cautiously. "I just wanted to say thank you, not just for what you did for your daughter, but for showing people what it looks like when someone actually stands up." Aurelia looked at her, unsure whether to smile or hide. The girl continued. I had something kind of similar happen last year. Not the same, but close. No one believed me. But when your story came out, people started listening. Even my principal. Everything changed." The girl offered a folded piece of paper. "I wrote this for you," she said. "Both of you." Aurelia took the note and unfolded it slowly. Inside was a short poem, scrawled in careful handwriting. It was about shadows and standing tall, about fear and resistance, about finding strength in someone else's courage. By the time she finished reading, her throat had tightened again, but not with sadness. "Thank you," she whispered. The woman smiled. "It meant a lot to us." As they walked away, Rhonda put a hand on Aurelia's back. "You didn't just survive something," she said. "You became a reason someone else kept going." Aurelia folded the poem and tucked it into her pocket like something precious. Back at home, the house felt less quiet than it had the week before. There were fewer reporters on the street now, fewer calls. The chaos had begun to subside, but in its place was something slower and deeper, a ripple effect. The mayor's office had just finalized the new Citizen Review Board for Law Enforcement Oversight. Rhonda had been invited to join, but declined. She didn't need another title. She had already done her part. What mattered more was that she had spoken, that her daughter had spoken, and that others had heard them. That evening, Rhonda brought out the same board game they hadn't finished the previous week. Aurelia looked skeptical at first, but then nodded and joined her. They played for nearly an hour before one of them cheated without shame, and laughter finally filled the room again. Later, as Aurelia prepared for bed, Rhonda stood in the hallway and watched her brush her teeth. There were still faint bruises on her scalp, but they were fading. The girl's posture was different now, straighter, more conscious. Not out of fear, but out of something stronger. A sense of self she hadn't carried before. "I talked to Principal Emerson today," Aurelia said through the foam of her toothpaste. "She wants me to help start a student-led safety committee for reporting stuff and for helping kids feel, I don't know, protected." Rhonda raised her eyebrows. "That sounds like a big job." I said, "Yes." Rhonda nodded. "Of course you did." When Aurelia turned off the bathroom light and crawled into bed, Rhonda sat beside her and smoothed the blanket over her. Neither of them spoke for a while. They didn't need to. But then Aurelia looked up, her voice barely a whisper. "Thanks for not losing it that day." Rhonda smiled. "I almost did." "I know, but you didn't." She leaned into her mother, resting her head against her shoulder. "You did something better," she said. "You made them listen. I just stood there." That was enough. As the moon climbed over the rooftops and the world beyond their windows kept turning, Rhonda held her daughter in the quiet comfort of the moment. The storm had passed, but its lessons remained. Not all heroes wore capes. Some wore motherhood like armor. Some stood between harm and hope with nothing but presence. And some, like Aurelia, found their voice not by shouting, but simply by refusing to disappear. Somewhere across the city, Jonathan Cross sat alone in a dim room, staring at the document in front of him. It was a formal notice. His suspension had been converted into termination. The recommendation from the internal review was firm. The video, the witness testimony, the public pressure, none of it could be ignored. He'd spoken to the department psychologist earlier that afternoon. Not much had been said, but something had cracked open. He didn't know what came next for him, but for the first time in his career, he knew what couldn't come next. He would never wear the badge again. And, in a way, that was justice too. The next morning, as the Rousey home stirred to life, a package arrived. No label, just a small box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a hand-carved wooden figurine. 2 figures, one tall, one small, standing back to back. No names, no message. But Rhonda understood. They were still here, and they weren't going anywhere. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Watch the next video to keep going and share this one with someone who needs to see it.